All right, guys, this is your lesson on energy resources. So we have three main types of energy resources here on Earth. This is where we get our power and electricity and where we get the fuels to power our cars and our airplanes and all that. This is what I'm talking about when I talk about energy resources, all the things we use to make things go. All right, so there's three main kinds. It's non-renewable, renewable, and alternative. So a non-renewable resource will not replenish in a human lifetime. So one of the main ones we talk about when we talk about non-renewable is fossil fuels. Fossil fuels take millions of years to form underground. That's a lot longer than a human lifetime. So if we use up all the fossil fuels, it would take a million years for more to form under the ground. So when we talk about non-renewable, it is not going to replenish or be remade in a human lifetime. But the exact opposite of that would be renewable resources. They will replenish within a human lifetime. So if I go outside, cut down a tree, and burn it for firewood in my fireplace, then it's going to grow back. It will grow back in my lifetime. If I plant another tree out there the same day I cut one down, it will grow back in my lifetime. Now, that's just one example. There's a bunch of renewable resources, okay? So that's just one example. I'm just trying to explain what that means, okay? And an alternative fuel source is any source that is not derived from fossil fuels. So if it doesn't have anything to do with fossil fuels, then it is considered an alternative fuel source, okay? So let's talk about non-renewables. All right, so non-renewables would be fossil fuels, like I just said. Okay, so fossil fuels are non-renewable. All right, and we talked about what these were in one of our previous lessons. Fossil fuels would be coal, oil, and natural gas. Those would be our our fossil fuels, and those are non-renewable. All right. Now, when we talk about renewable resources, these are ones that we can renew in a human lifetime. So something we can recreate, we can grow it back, things like that, or we can just keep reusing it. All right. So some examples of a renewable resource. We've got a bunch of these. We do have biomass. I'm going to write these on here for us. All right. Biomass would be anything we're using as far as like waste products, or like I said before, if you're burning down a tree, or not burning down a tree, you're cutting down a tree to burn for firewood. That would be an example of biomass. We're using something that was alive and we're creating energy from it. Okay. So like I said, that tree is renewable if we're taking our waste, like our trash, if we're burning that and using that to create heat, to create fuel. Kind of like when we talk about steam engines, you're burning something to create that heat, to create the steam and create the energy. So we can burn our trash, we could do that to create energy for us to use. That's what biomass is. The next one is geothermal. We talked about this a little bit in some of the classes because I had some students ask about it. But geothermal means we're running pipes down deep into the earth so it gets close to Earth's mantle. Not right at it, but close to it. And so it puts off enough heat that it heats up that water down there, and that heating it creates pressure. It can create steam, or in some places they use it literally to heat their hot water. All right. So geothermal energy, it's exactly what it sounds like. We're using the earth to create heat. Okay. That's what geothermal is. Okay. The next one is solar. Most of you know what solar is. Most of you have probably seen solar panels. There are some, if you take 521 all the way into like Indian Land and head up that way and get towards Fort Mill, then there are some houses that have solar panels on them. There's a field or two that have solar panels in them. So they're using that to harness the sun's energy and store that energy in batteries to charge, to power their homes. They're using it for their TVs, to power the electricity for their fans and the lights in the house. They're using it for everything. So it's the same way we use electricity. Like if you charge your phone, if you charge an external, like a battery pack, if you have one of those, if you charge that and carry it around with you just to charge your phone with it, it's kind of the same idea. They're just using the sun to create that energy instead of getting it from a different source. All right. The next one is water. All right. And this one has a different name sometimes. So instead of just calling it water power, a lot of times they'll call it hydroelectric. So just like when we talk about geothermal, meaning the earth's heat, hydroelectric would be water to create electricity. Okay. So when we're talking about water power, if you've ever seen pictures of the Hoover Dam or I'm trying to think of another one that's nearby. There's one in Catawba that Duke uses to help create the energy we use here in the town of Kershaw and in Lancaster. Um, so what they're doing is they're putting turbines basically under the water, and the water rolls over it. It spins those, and those are used to generate electricity. So they've got a generator in there. So when you spin that, it's creating energy. All right. It's got an electromagnet in there, and it causes that to put out electricity, and they're storing that electricity to send to people to use in their houses. All right. And then they're doing basically the same thing with wind energy. Okay. So those turbines that we have underwater, they're basically doing the exact same thing when they put them on a really tall post and put them out in the open fields or in places where they get a lot of wind. They're putting those out there. The wind spins, that turbine spins those blades, and it generates electricity that's then stored or sent to somebody's house so that they can use it. Okay. So a lot of these resources people talk about, oh, well, what if there's a drought? There's no water. We don't have power. That's not necessarily how it works. Okay. So for the most part, when we get a drought, it's usually just in one area. So that one area might not be able to create energy at that time, but there's other places that can still create that energy or have that energy that's stored and send it to those areas. So we talk about the same thing with solar panels. If you use a solar panel to power your house, you have a battery pack on your house, just like you have a battery in your cell phone. Your cell phone doesn't have to be plugged into the wall all day long for you to be able to use it. It's got a battery in it that stores that energy and uses it a little bit along. Okay. So it is possible to run out of energy. It's possible now to run out of energy. It's just a different way of creating that energy and storing that energy. Okay. So that's renewable energy. And now we need to talk about alternative. Okay. So I am going to point this out, and I'm going to highlight it in purple because we've got alternative written in pink and renewable written in blue. So that purple is kind of a mix of both. These would still be considered alternative resources because they are not derived from fossil fuels. Okay. So these are renewable resources that are also considered alternative. Okay. So the only truly just alternative resource when we talk about alternative resources would be nuclear power. All right. So a lot of you have probably seen the nuclear power plants, or maybe you haven't, that are, there's some in Columbia, there's some in Greenville, there's some in the near Charlotte area, but not Charlotte proper because they're not going to be downtown. But there are nuclear power stations. What they're doing is they're taking radioactive material and letting it decay, and that gives off a ton of heat, which heats up water that's in the tanks with it. So it's heating up that water, it's generating steam, it's creating all that pressure, and they're using that to generate electricity. Okay? So it's very similar to the way we're talking about water and wind energy being used. They're using it to create that heat to power a turbine that's connected to a generator that creates electricity for us. Okay. So when we're talking about alternative fuel sources, remember it's anything that doesn't come from a fossil fuel. So these over here count as alternative as well because they don't come from fossil fuels, but they're considered renewable. Now, nuclear power is not renewable because once we run out of that radioactive material, we can't use it anymore. And once it decays, it decays. It's not usable anymore. It's still radioactive. So that's when we talk about that nuclear waste, we've got to put it somewhere where it's not going to affect people. It's not going to be near people. We talked about radiation. We talked about the electromagnetic spectrum. We talked about how dangerous it can be. So that's part of why a lot of people are not fans of nuclear power, but it does work. That's why we use it. It works and it's efficient. It gives us power that we need. But there are risks with it, just like there are risks with all these other fuel sources that we talk about. Okay. All right. So these are our three main types of fuel sources, and we are going to dig into a lot of these just a little bit deeper. I'm going to have you do some research on them, talk about how they're used, where they come from, that kind of stuff. Okay. That's it.